John Leland is the author of Why Kerouac Matters, a look back on the 50th anniversary of On the Road, the Beat Generation, Kerouac, interpretations and misinterpretations of a book that most of us have read and maybe haven't been taking from it what we should be, or what you took from it the second time you read it. Why did you think people needed to take another look at the book?
Well, I think because we all read it when we're 18, 19 years old, and we forget how old Kerouac was when he wrote it. He was 29 when he wrote it. He was 35 when it was published. He was writing for his peers, guys like him who had been in the military service, in the Navy and the Merchant Marine, who had been married, divorced, married a second time, and by the time his second marriage, by the time he wrote the main draft of the book, his second marriage was on the rocks. He'd been in jail. You know, he was an older guy, and this is an adult book, but we read it at 18 and 19 and think it's about adolescent rebellion. And so, you know, what I wanted to do is go back into the book and see what was there beyond that. And there's a whole other story there.
Yeah. And well, the subtitle is The Lessons of On the Road, They're Not What You Think. So what are they?
Well, the main lesson didn't actually make the final version of the book. Kerouac was writing...
Wait, whose fault is that? How does that happen?
As, you know, I think it's an overall lesson of the book. But when Kerouac was writing it strictly as a fictional novel, God comes to one of the characters and says, "Forgive everything." And I think that's the kind of the underlying lesson of the novel. But
oh, it didn't make it into the final version of On the Road.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were saying it didn't make it into the final version of your book.
No, it's in my book. Yeah.
Is it in the famous scroll version?
It's not in the scroll, because by the time he got to the scroll, then he was writing what he thought of as nonfiction, kind of fictionalized nonfiction.
Why don't you do a little background in debunking one of the most popular myths, which is he wrote the book in 3 weeks, which is apparently something he said in an interview with Steve Allen and just kind of popped into his head, even though maybe it wasn't strictly true. But even that 120-foot scroll wasn't the first version of the book. He'd been working on it for a while.
He started writing it in around 1947, and he told friends about it, and he was working on it. He had a lot of different characters he was playing with, a lot of different plots, and it wasn't coming together. He'd start and stop, start and stop. And then in sort of the winter of 50-51, he began this exchange of letters with Neal Cassady, who's the inspiration behind Dean Moriarty and On the Road. And they started to write this more confessional, autobiographical style of letters. And that sort of gave him the breakthrough to write this book, and it would really be about their life together. And so in April of 51, he brought together his old drafts. He'd written a lot of scenes from their lives together in his journals and his letters, and then using all of that, in 3 weeks, he did bang this thing out on that scroll of typing paper, tracing paper.
And the story had kind of, well, it depends how much is fictional and how much is true, had kind of finished. The book ends in what was basically January of that year, and then he banged out the scroll in April, I guess.
Yeah, we don't know exactly how the scroll ended because his friend Lucian Carr's dog ate the ending.
Of the scroll?
Yeah.
Really? So the one they paid $2.4 million doesn't have the end?
No, it ends in mid-sentence.
Really? Have you got to work with it to write this book, or you just saw a transcript of it?
I had a photocopy of it that I was working with when I wrote the book. And it was fun. I was going back and forth, and I was using his letters and his journals and the way he'd written about things in them, and also in the scroll draft, to try to get at what was on Kerouac's mind and what his intentions were for the book.
One of the main themes of your book is that Kerouac was a more conservative person, had more desires for starting a family, although he had a lot of false starts as far as marriage goes. Why do you think that his ideas were kind of co-opted by people that he didn't necessarily agree with? And how much does that matter if hippies wanted to read On the Road and be inspired by it?
You should read the book as you like. And I think one of the reasons that people tend to read it the way they do is that the Dean Moriarty character, the Neal Cassady character, is just much better drawn than anybody in the book, and is really one of the great characters from American literature. We just love that guy. You know, he drives too fast for his cars and has too much of a sex drive for the various women he's involved with at the same time, who he might be married to one or two of them at the same time. And he's just like this circus we all want to run away and join. So he's a lot of fun. So we're captivated by him. And then I think the other thing is that, you know, we live within history, and what happened after On the Road was the 60s counterculture, and I think we tend to see it through the prism of the 60s counterculture. You know, Kerouac was voicing some of the ideas of that very early on, and we forget that, you know, Kerouac had nothing but regret for the 60s counterculture. And the minute you think that what's important about this book is the stuff that came after, you kind of lose Kerouac.
On the Road's a book that has meant so much to so many people, and we've seen some of it in like the reviews and commentaries that have come out. It seems like a real tough thing to do, to say, I'm gonna tell you about a book that maybe you have your own ideas about.
Well, I wanted to challenge people's ideas. I don't want to, you know, I look at this book as a voice in a conversation. I don't look at myself as being up on the podium dictating how you should read this book. I want to give you something to think about as you read it, and start that conversation. And just say, like, if you only see Dean's story and you only want to go join Dean on the road and you know, go the speeds that he goes and have the sex that he goes, you miss an important part of the book, and you miss the part that was most important to Kerouac. Your
colleague, David Brooks, here in the building, wrote a column that I'm sure you've read.
I can't believe I've been called a boomer square by David Brooks.
Well,
it's like, I don't know how to tell my family about this.
Let me read the quote and let me get your reaction. He wrote on the 50th anniversary, and there have been not just your book, but a lot of people have wanted to write about On the Road on this occasion. He wrote, reading through the anniversary commemorations, you feel the gravitational pull of the great boomer narcissists. All cultural artifacts have to be interpreted through whatever experience the baby boomer generation is going through at that moment. So a book formerly known for its youthful exuberance now becomes a book of gloomy, middle-aged disillusion.
Well, you know, I think that Brooks kind of manufactures a critical consensus and then objects to it because it's a critical consensus. I don't think there really is one there.
You don't think
I actually liked that column. I thought it was quite entertaining, but I don't think there is.
Maybe not a critical consensus, but is that a fair description of your take?
That it's a gloomy book?
Yeah, and that the youthful exuberance is overplayed in people's imagination.
I think that's correct. And you know, Kerouac called it a powerful and singularly gloomy book. So that's how, you know, that's how he saw it. It is. These guys suffer. Their lives are hard, you know, and their real lives were hard. There was a time when, in Kerouac's travels, when he was living on grass, and not the good kind either. You know,
but there's a romance to it. There's a excitement to it, and there's a danger, but just so much danger.
There is, and one of the things that's fun about the book, and one of the reasons it's lasted as long as it has, I think, is the tension between those things. You shouldn't lose the sight of that fun. You shouldn't lose that, you know, wild, yea-saying overburst of American joy, which is how Kerouac describes the Dean character. But you should just be aware that there's this other book there too. You know, Sal says, you know, this has got to stop, all this franticness and jumping around. But still, let's enjoy it while we can. You know, the jazz scenes in the book are so delightful, they're so rich. And, but they're, you know, they're like the blues. They're happy and sad at the same time. And I just think we need to capture both of those voices.
Do you think that's what Kerouac thought he was writing?
I think that Kerouac thought he was writing a book about a religious quest and a search for meaning in the world, but not intellectual. He didn't, you know, it's not an intellectually complicated book, and I don't think he was going for intellectual complexity. He was going for emotional richness and that kind of like musical catharsis.